Next level, feeling form. I've coded these in the same color because I feel like these are pretty connected. If you manage to get to this level where you start to feel form, meaning that you've internalized perspective to such a degree that you really don't have to plot everything out constantly. You have the ability to navigate 3D space a little bit more effortlessly, and you can put things in front of each other and you can make things come out, some basic construction, things like that. At this stage in our metaphor of becoming a writer, over here you're really beginning now to start writing your own stories, not just being constrained by all the technical issues that we were dealing with earlier. So these three, as soon as you start breaking in here, knowledge and design start becoming unlocked for you, because you can now focus on the creative side far more, and you can spend less time having to troubleshoot things that are happening that would previously sabotage your work at all times. So feeling form, and we've kind of hinted at this before, we've covered a portion of it. It really is internalized perspective, intuitive understanding of space, feeling volumes and direction in space, so how something sits. I remember going to work one time and I was just sketching in my sketchbook, and I was literally doing these things where I would just have something like this and I would ask myself, okay, if I wanted this to go forward, where would a point have to be? Like, what would I have to do in order to just not have to plot it out, not have to put a grid underneath it and think of the vanishing points? And then let's say if I wanted it to go forward and taper slightly, where would I put my point? How would I do that? And before I would have to do something like this, I would have to find how low it's going to go and then taper it inwards and then extrude it outwards. So then I'll find my point and then I could go and I could connect it. And for the other side, I have to do the same. I go inwards, I go downwards, I go outwards, and then here's my point, and then I can connect these, and then voila, I tapered the box. So I remember doing all of these exercises where I would just make something and I would be like, okay, where would I have to place my point for it to be going forward and tapered? And the point would be somewhere here. And then where's the other? It's over here. If I connect them, okay, it's now going forward and it's tapered. Since we said before about building patterns and all those things, you truly are just going through all of these various possible options for your brain, and you're just training it to see more and more. Really, truly, kind of like a martial artist. Just if we have the situation, what would I do? Do in the next situation. How would I do it here? So you're drilling all of these configurations until they get stored in your brain. Now, at first, when this is just far too much, and obviously these configurations could be, millions, but you don't have to worry. You don't have to memorize or store them or anything like that. It's just as you're working on your pieces, as you are drawing what it is that you want to be making, your brain will just be getting faster and more efficient and better at doing what it is that you would like it to do, so that you don't have to constantly be worried about doing something. As you're doing your construction, as you are trying to work on projects, and you are doing your due diligence with grids and perspective and vanishing points and all that stuff, you will slowly be getting faster. And as you're also doing your training of deconstructing volumes and thinking of simple volumes and how they're put together and how they make more complicated volumes together, all of these things will be accumulating together into, at some point, you not having to plot everything out. You feeling how something is going inwards when something is going outwards. So all of these things are going to be more and more encoded with time. And I got this from Glenn Vilppu and his language that he would be using as he's drawing. So I highly recommend that you check out some of his courses and some of his work and just hear his thought process, hear his language. And I'm sure that with the context that we've provided so far, that it'll make more sense, that this is just someone who is very highly trained, who is internalized perspective, and he is truly just creating the illusion, and he's narrating as he's saying how something is going inwards, how something is coming outwards. He's truly just saying these things, and he's creating the illusion as he's doing that. Now, I've also put here that it's never complete, meaning that it's never just fully, you never have to think about drawing. Drawing is always difficult, but you just need to spend less time at this stage worrying about all this stuff. So with feeling form, the skills that are in this level, we have advanced hand control. So over here we had basic hand control. We're just trying to make some lines, trying to make them serve our purposes, to just be correct and accurate enough for us to be able to do the basic things that we're training at that time. Over here you get advanced. So you have increased accuracy. So without as much effort, you can now produce better results. So instead of just having straights and having to measure them and things like that, you can now think more about curves. And curves are incredibly complicated. Like if you think about a curve in three-dimensional space, if we just put a simple grid here, this curve could be, this could be a point that's going outwards, this could be a point that's behind it. It's changing orientation in so many different directions that, let's say in 3D, this would be quite laborious to have to make. You would have to make this curve and do it from, let's say, the side view, and then you have to come to the front view and, let's say, adjust it if it's going to be coming in or out. But as you're drawing, you're relying on your brain on all of these patterns that you've formed, and you can just make one line, and essentially in 3D space it means so many different things. You create things so quickly at this stage. So advanced hand control, curves, complex shapes. So basically we're progressing everything that we've been doing so far. Advanced building, so more complex forms. Instead of just, let's say, cubes and cylinders and things like that, you can now start thinking about more complicated connections. You can start tapering, stylizing forms, or having them connect in more complex ways. You're not really restrained by technical ability so much. You can now really get more into the design and knowledge side of things. So the perceptual side of this level, we have intuitive 3D navigation. So like I said, you'll be feeling more space, and you'll be just relying on the fact that your brain has internalized the capability to create this illusion on the fly. You don't have to map everything out and construct everything. And with the ability to make the space, you can now arrange objects in it, and you can also create objects within the space, which is what opens up the door to design. For these next two, let's have a look at knowledge and design over here. So when you open these three, you are less and less concerned with technical issues. So now you can get more into the creative side. So now that feeling form, which is essentially what all of these three levels are building up to ultimately, it's just they're all dealing with creating structure and creating geometry. So now that that's almost taken care of for you, now you can start using drawing as a way to learn about things. And this is one of my most favorite things about drawing. I like learning about things. I like learning how things work, what they're for, how they're organized, just things like that. I'm curious about this stuff. And it's great that you can use drawing as a way to investigate things. So that's why with a lot of these drawings from Steve Houston, for instance, and a lot of the teaching from New Masters Academy from Glenn Vilppu and Steve Houston is all about just these simple volumes, these forms, how they fit together. They explain anatomy and what volumes it's made of, how they fit together. And you do this endless drawing of anatomy and of forms, not with necessarily just the goal in mind to be able to do that, but truly it's an interesting thing in and of itself. It's kind of like playing this game of, well, what does an arm look like from this side? What does it look like from the other side? And how do these muscles connect, and where do they end? And it truly is like playing this game. It's kind of like solving a puzzle all the time. You're creating the simple volumes, and then you're having to put these more complicated things over top of them, and you have to resolve all of these issues of what's over top of what, and what would you be able to see, and how is it overlapping something else, how do you clarify it. A lot of thinking gets involved in this stage, which is what keeps it fun. It isn't about copying. You can see none of these drawings are copied. There's not a single human that looks like this. There's no bicep that looks like that, but visually we absolutely understand the idea. This is a symbol essentially, but it's enhanced by so much real-world experience and knowledge and understanding of the visual language that you can now combine powerful symbols with the ability to position things. And now this symbolic stage, before there was such a hurdle to get out of, now it becomes more powerful again, because let's say, what is the most iconic representation of an eye from a certain angle? And you draw that instead of maybe what's in your reference. How do you convey the idea of an eye? How do you convey this is the idea of an arm and of a bicep? Look at how flat this deltoid is. This isn't a real deltoid. No one looks like that. It's not that square, but it definitely gives you the idea, because generally a deltoid would be squarish and the bicep would be kind of flat-ish. So you have these ideas that are exaggerated here, and this is where you get into the realm of design. And you also are in the realm of knowledge. You know, you are learning about these objects, their construction, how they're put together. You're learning about their particularities, and this is truly how you learn how to draw an eye, let's say. Not from a tutorial that gives you an outline and a shape, but you are understanding that it's a sphere, that there is something over top of that sphere. You are respecting the volumes, and you are understanding what things look like in space. And then you can start drawing things from imagination. This is why imagination is kind of at the end of this process of understanding how to create the illusion, understanding what are the different components that make up objects, starting to be able to draw those, and then finally being able to recombine all of these things that you've studied and all of these different techniques and things like that to create whatever it is that your message is. So to be acquiring knowledge through drawing, you essentially have to not be thinking about the drawing so much, meaning that you're not really thinking about how to make something. You're truly just like, oh, so this looks like this, and then this looks like that. You're really more concerned with the object at this stage. Less so with either measuring points or trying to create volumes, things like that. These are internalized. So from the standpoint of being a writer, this is kind of like you're doing research. You're now taking language and maybe you're reading about something, or you're writing, you're testing a few things out. You're trying to see what would happen if you combined two different things. And this is design. This is when not only do you have technical ability, not only do you have knowledge of how certain things work, but now let's say you can start combining different things together. A very common thing to come up with a new thing is take two things that don't belong together, put them together. Feng Zhu does that very often in his videos. You can see them on YouTube, and he'll take something like interesting creatures, like let's say insects or fish, and he'll combine them with technology, and he'll make spaceships, weapons, or architecture, all kinds of things from the inspiration of those shapes. So at this stage, you can start coming up with shape languages, which are just interesting combinations of things, novel explorations of different ideas, just being able to be creative with things, being able to play at this stage, because really design and imagination, a lot of it is just about discovery. It's about trying stuff. It's about suggesting things. It's not necessarily about this technical pursuit that we've been struggling before. And we had to go through the technical just in order to access this. There would be no way around it. So at this stage, let's say you're looking at the natural world, you're looking at shapes in nature, you're looking at how different things are made, you're looking at all the different infinite varieties of configurations of shape. Because even though we talk about volume, each and every volume is shaped in a certain way. And an interesting thing happens when you get more advanced. You can start going backwards and forwards in between these different modes. So you're not necessarily, let's say, if you make a shape, you're not necessarily thinking of it as a two-dimensional shape. As you're more advanced, you can think of these as three-dimensional things. So you'll have this kind of hybrid squashed thinking where you might just be trying to come up with an interesting two-dimensional shape, but then you can use that and come up with something three-dimensional from it. Like this could be, let's say, a waterfall that's happening here with some sort of mountain ridge right next to it or something like that. Or it could be something different. You know, it could be a piece of an armor or something like that. So you're converting these interesting shapes, understanding what an interesting shape means in shape aesthetics. That's a study area all in its own until you start understanding more. That took me years to even just figure out what that means. And then you can also start thinking about function. So you're designing things not only in terms of aesthetically designing things, but you can also think about functionality so that you can make things more convincing, like robots or things like that. So our next two perceptual skills here for this level, we have shape design, and then we have advanced observation. So the shape design is how can we stylize shapes? How can we create shapes that are going to fit within the design that we're trying to make? And you really need to start looking more at natural forms, at other designers, at things like that at this stage, and see what makes for interesting shapes, what makes for whatever the appropriate shape, whatever the appropriate configuration of volumes and shape is for your project. So sometimes maybe it's more dynamic, sometimes it's just a slower shape. It really depends on what it is that is appropriate. It's not just always about making aggressive or fast or whatever type of shapes. It's whatever is appropriate for your project. And advanced observation here. So noticing critical details, paying attention to subtleties. So we're no longer just trying to make, let's say, this type of shape, just this XY alignment. We're now at this stage just what makes something look like it. What makes an object particular. If we have 100 faces, how can we exaggerate and make each and every face more readable, more memorable? How do we push things? What subtleties? What about this face makes it so unique so that we can immediately look at someone, let's say, or look at a silhouette or look at a design and immediately tell that it is this particular character, this particular feature. So at this stage, we are becoming more and more attuned to the subtleties of things. We are not just copying anymore. We are truly just pushing everything in the way that we need it to be to serve our project. This is what design is about. And also over here, you can see this little sidebar over here, this little extension. So when you get all of these under your belt, and now that you start acquiring knowledge, you can really combine that with a subject that you're interested in. So sometimes I'll get questions from beginners and they'll ask me, so I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just starting out. Should I study anatomy? And I would say that you really need to study anatomy when you get to about this stage, when you have just enough training under your belt to be able to produce these simpler volumes that the anatomy will be sitting over. Essentially, anatomy is a detail that will go over the basic structure that you're establishing. So until you can draw well enough, you can know anatomy. Glenn Vilpe uses the example of a doctor. A doctor will know anatomy far better than any artist, but if they can draw, they can draw. They're still a doctor, they're not an artist. An artist needs to develop this visual language, this ability to communicate through the visual medium. And drawing is the basis of that. It's a massive amount of this illusion. So until your drawing skill is advanced enough to be able to portray these complicated forms, it really is almost impossible to use them. And this is something that I did when I started out. When I first started, I started with anatomy. I'd heard from somewhere that anatomy is one of the fundamentals. So I kind of just decided, well, I'll start there. I didn't really have a reason for why this is the first one. I just thought, well, I have to start somewhere. So I started with that. And I studied anatomy for months. and I couldn't use it at all. I remember just sitting in this exact same place actually and trying to draw the scapula because I was learning about it, and I knew where all the things would attach to it. I knew about all the different little subtleties of it, but I couldn't even get close to drawing it. I would get the proportions always wrong. It'd be far too long, far too wide. I could never draw it. So as a result, I didn't really get to use any of that knowledge until years later when my drawing skill improved. Then I did a second pass of anatomy, and then finally I was able to start using it. So this doesn't mean that you can't start, let's say, on the side. So if you spend 5 or 10% of your time on a subject, on some more theory that you're just interested in, that you're studying, that's absolutely fine. Just don't make that your 90 or 99%. Don't prioritize that. Prioritize your drawing at the beginning levels, and then afterwards you'll be able to combine things more efficiently. Otherwise, you're just learning all these skills that stay separate and are not really able to build upon each other. So over here, when you get to knowledge at about this level, you can start going into a subject. So if you're interested in doing environment art or characters or tech or whatever your thing might be, then you can start studying more about that. You can go and now you can study about your anatomy or different cultures or different ornament symbols, just whatever your interest might be. And you can, let's say, start looking at, if tech is your thing, then start looking at different vehicles, looking at different mechanisms of how things are built, and start drawing those, you know. Now you can actually use drawing to investigate these things deeper, to memorize their shapes, to see what makes them iconic, and then use them in your designs.